Hello. At the end of our Zoom class, I noted that Clytemnestra speaks to the chorus and the messenger in a kind of double language, using words that they take to be praise or honor for her husband and are meant to be taken that way, but which have very different meanings for Clytemnestra herself. Phrases such as the best way and the welcome he deserves, phrases such as I have not changed and faithful to the last, and perhaps above all the phrase open wide the gates. All of those seemingly innocent phrases are coded with Clytemnestra's own private intentions. For her, the best way to treat Agamemnon and the way he deserves is to kill him. She has wanted for 10 years to do so, and it's true, in that respect she has not changed. She has been faithful, though faithful in her mind, not to him as a wife, but rather to the idea of revenge that she formulated when he took the life of their daughter. And Agamemnon will soon discover that when they open not the gates of the city to greet him, but rather when Clytemnestra opens the gates of the palace to trap him inside. Now, why does Clytemnestra speak this double discourse and relish it so? Well, partly, I think, because she enjoys trickery and concealment as forms of power. And here she's hiding her true plans from the chorus and the messenger in a series of misleading statements. But Clytemnestra also uses this language of twofold meanings to work herself up to a pitch of excitement for the execution of a long-awaited revenge plan. Even though the chorus doesn't know what she's planning, nevertheless, when Clytemnestra goes back inside the palace, the chorus expresses a profound sense of uneasiness, of dread. But a dread that, like the watchmen at the start, they're too afraid to articulate as specific fears or to envision with any degree of precision. Rather than rejoicing, however, at Agamemnon's return, the chorus speaks of, quote, a fatal hour approaching and of the coming of, quote, new violence. But it's a violence that they don't announce and, as I've suggested, are afraid to name even to themselves. Now, with this in mind, let's have a close look at Agamemnon's arrival itself, which comes nearly halfway through the play and consists of a single crucial scene before he makes his fatal walk into the palace. It seems curious that the play's putative tragic hero, named in the title, arrives on stage so late and spends so little time there. Consider the stage directions that attend his coming. Agamemnon enters in his chariot, his plunder borne before him by his entourage. Behind him, half-hidden, stands Cassandra. The old men of the chorus press toward him. Now, Agamemnon's trappings here reflect his character. As the Greek commander, he delights in his triumph at Troy. He milks it, standing above the chorus in the chariot in which he's arrived, having his entourage there to display fully the plunder that he has taken from Troy after his men sacked and burned the city. And chief among the plunder that he has brought to display from Troy is Cassandra, his love slave, the daughter of the conquered and murdered Trojan king Priam. She is unwilling to be there. She cowers, trying to avoid the Greek eyes, this captive, quote, flower, who Agamemnon dishonestly claims followed him from Troy. Hardly. She's a prisoner. Now, even before Agamemnon speaks then, the impression that he gives is one of masculine confidence, privilege, and power. But he also exudes, even before he speaks, an unmistakable pride. That is his primary flaw, and that contributes, as we'll see, to his downfall. Well, the chorus's response to the king's arrival is curiously measured, considering the 10 years they have been waiting for him. They say, "Come, my king, the scourge of Troy, the true son of Atreus, how to salute you, how to praise you, neither too high nor too low, but to hit the note of praise that suits your honor." When a man succeeds, they share his glory, torturing their faces too often into smiles. But the good shepherd knows his flock. When the eyes seem to brim with love, it is only unction fawning. The king, he will know better than we can know. But now, from the depths of trust and love, I say, well fought, The end is worth the labor. Search, my king, and learn at last who stayed at home and kept their faith, and who betrayed the city. Now you'll note in this opening invocation of his return, as they address him, the chorus doesn't want Agamemnon to think that they are merely flattering him by overpraise. They say they want to strike a balance that reflects, quote, our depths of trust and love, and that is entirely sincere without going too far and becoming too fawning. They emphasize that some people, quote, torture their faces into smiles and bow unctuously to heroic men whom they don't really love or respect. Now, why do you think the chorus makes this point when they first speak to Agamemnon? Well, they're not just demonstrating the sincerity of their own devotion, but more important, they seem to be subtly warning Agamemnon about what they sense might be Clytemnestra's deceit, though they never name her specifically. Indeed, Clytemnestra will flatter Agamemnon and twist her face into a welcoming smile in order to gain his trust and thereby lure him into the palace to kill him. Well, Agamemnon's first speech is violent, sanguine, and self-serving as he describes conquering Troy. And this contrasts with Clytemnestra, who, for all of her faults, you may remember, had compassionately imagined and sympathized with the plight of Trojan mothers who, after the slaughter, were kneeling over their dead sons, embracing their bodies. Quote, these aged loins that gave them life, these sobbing women. Now, by contrast to Clytemnestra's compassion, Agamemnon feels no pity for the race that he has just defeated. Rather, he revels in the brutality and conquest that the trick of the Trojan horse allowed, that permitted them to achieve it, even though the gods disapprove of the barbarism of how, once they were inside, they slaughtered the sleeping Trojans. Agamemnon feels no compunction about that at all, no sense of sympathy. Rather, he tells the chorus, for their mad outrage of a queen, that is, for the taking of Helen, we raped their city. We were right. The beast of Argos, foals of the wild mare, thousands massed in armor, rose on the night. And Pleiades went down, and crashing through their walls, our bloody lion lapped its fill, gorging on the blood of kings. Well, he takes great pleasure in describing this. Now, specifically, the wild mare he refers to is, of course, the Trojan horse, in which the Greek warriors hid. As presenting it as a gift, it was wheeled in through the walls of Troy. And they came out then like lions, appropriate because the lion is the symbol of Mycenae. And like lions, they then preyed on the inhabitants, including the royal family, shedding, as he puts it, the blood of kings. Now, the exultation in this violent and extreme annihilation is not appealing. Our first impression of Agamemnon is rather off-putting. And yet Agamemnon insists, quote, we were right to, quote, rape the city of Troy in order to retrieve Helen, Menelaus's abducted wife, the queen of Sparta. Well, Clytemnestra enters a moment later, and her attendants are carrying dark red tapestries, okay, crimson. They are, these tapestries, which will be laid down like a carpet, the most potent visual symbol in the play. Essentially, Clytemnestra is offering Agamemnon the red carpet treatment so that his exalted foot need not touch the mere earth. And of course, on a stage with very few props, these tapestries would have been one of the few brought out, and certainly the most important. Now, the red tapestries, I think, embrace three different symbolic meanings. First, they are a token of extreme exaltation, of reverence of the highest order, and as such, they appeal to Agamemnon's vanity. Second, these red tapestries unmistakably symbolize the blood that Agamemnon will soon shed after he walks on the tapestries into the palace. Clytemnestra invokes that meaning of the tapestries as blood in another instance of her double discourse. When the attendants spread the tapestries leading to the palace doors, consider what Clytemnestra says at that moment. She says that, "Come to me now, my dearest, down from that car of war, but never set the foot that stamped out Troy on earth again, my great one. Women, why delay? Have your riders pave the way with tapestries." And so they spread the tapestries on the ground leading to the palace door, and Clytemnestra says, "Let the red stream flow quickly and bear him home, to the home he never hoped to see. Justice lead him on." Let the red stream flow. Clearly, in her own private language, she means the red flow of his life ebbing out of him after she stabs him. Now, note that she uses the word justice here rather pointedly. Justice lead him in, another word that has a double meaning. She wants Agamemnon to think that she means that it is only just, only right that he receive this honorific treatment as the conquering hero. But privately, of course, Clytemnestra means that she will be taking and executing justice in killing him. Now, the third and final implication symbolically of these red fabrics is that they symbolize the bloodline of the house of Atreus and the curse that Agamemnon has inherited from his father. Note that the fabrics lead from Agamemnon's chariot directly to the door of the palace, which was where Agamemnon killed his brother's children years before, and where Agamemnon himself is about to die. Clytemnestra uses an ingeniously deceptive strategy to induce Agamemnon to walk on these tapestries. Rather than immediately bowing before him or inviting him to tread on them, she declares her love first by way of a complaint. She wants Agamemnon to know how much she suffered for 10 years while he was gone, how deeply she missed him. And so she begins by describing the great pain she suffered in his absence. "O nobility of Argos gathered here, I'm not ashamed to tell you how I love this man. This is my life, my ordeal, long as the siege he laid at Troy, and more demanding to be without him. First, when a woman sits at home and a man is gone, the loneliness is terrible, unconscionable, and the rumors spread and fester. A runner comes with something dreadful close to his heels, and the next with worse news, and they shout it out, and the whole house can hear, and the wounds, oh, if he took one wound for each report to penetrate these walls, he'd be gashed like a dragnet. There were times," she says, "when she was so sorrowful, they'd had to cut me down and ease my throat from the noose. I wavered between the living and the dead." Now, this is all complete fabrication, but she wants to emphasize how she suffered, pining away, she says, for the absent Agamemnon. It's intended, this declaration, to win his trust before she can then use coercive flattery a bit later. She wisely holds off on that flattery for a while. Now, after all, it's a smart thing that she does, because we saw the chorus warned Agamemnon not to trust overt displays of fawning praise. So she doesn't do that at first. Agamemnon also said, "Well, I know and understand the flattering mirror of the proud." He understands that sometimes proud men like himself are prone to being moved by flattery. So he's aware, in a sense, of his own weakness. But nonetheless, aware though he is of that weakness, he doesn't control his pride, which in some ways is mirrored in the alluring red carpet that he cannot resist as a kind of narcissistic sign of his own greatness. Now, Clytemnestra tries to gain Agamemnon's trust in another way when she refers to their missing child. "Our child is gone," she said, "not standing by our side. The bond of our dearest pledge is mine and yours. By all rights, our child should be here." And then she pauses and she says, "Oh, Orestes, you seem startled. You needn't be." Now, this is a delightful moment, okay? When she refers to their missing child, Agamemnon fears, and is meant to fear, that Clytemnestra is referring to Iphigenia, whom he killed, the child who ought to be there. And she wants him to feel a moment of guilty panic before then saying, Oh, I mean Orestes. who was a child, who was in fact a little boy, when the war broke out and was sent away for reasons that the Greek dramatists disagree about. Well, he's still alive. And Agamemnon, when he hears, oh, you mean Orestes, he's relieved. It seems to him then that Clytemnestra doesn't bear a grudge for Iphigenia's death, which he had feared that she might. It seems to him that she still loves him. It seems that she has pined away for him during his long absence to the point where she couldn't bear it anymore and says she nearly committed suicide and they had to cut her down from the rope. Well, of course, he doesn't know, for one thing, that she has taken Aegisthus as her lover. And he certainly doesn't recognize that when she refers to rumors that tormented her, some of those rumors, of course, were that she had taken him as her lover. Well, having gained Agamemnon's trust through clever deceit, Clytemnestra then, and only then, uses overt flattery to lure him, to tempt him down from the chariot onto the carpet and into the palace. She knows that pride is her husband's fatal weakness, and she exploits it here brilliantly when she says, "Come to me now, my dearest, come down from the car, but never set foot that stamped out Troy on earth again, my great, when your feet are too great ever to touch the earth. No, you were meant to be above this ordinary, mundane realm that we call the world." Now, note that why does she want him to enter the palace this way? Earlier he had said that he would be entering the palace anyway because it is his palace. It's the ancestral royal residence of the Atreus family. So why lure him in this way when he's already going to go in anyway? Well, I think there are three reasons. First, Clytemnestra wants Agamemnon to enter the palace as quickly as possible so that she can kill him in the way she has planned, in a bathtub where she pretends they are going to be washing his brawny, war-scarred body, slaughtering him there, that she is prepared as if to honor him. Second, she wants Agamemnon to walk on the tapestries before she kills him because this would be an act of hubris. That is an act of extreme, excessive pride that would offend the gods. Now, Agamemnon himself is concerned about offending them as he debates whether or not, in fact, he should step onto this red carpet. He seems reluctant because he knows there's something not right about it. He says, "Only the gods deserve the pomps of honor and the stiff brocades of fame that you've laid down for me. To walk on them," and then he pauses, "I am human, and it makes my pulses stir with dread." Well, it should. Agamemnon knows that only the gods should be honored in this way, walking on carpets rather than the earth itself. But he is so exalted, so pumped up by his victory, and so pumped up even more by the flattery of Clytemnestra, that his hubris overcomes his judgment. Now, by getting Agamemnon to offend the gods then this way, just before she kills him, Clytemnestra wants to add another justification to a murder that we see, while it may be primarily motivated as revenge for Iphigenia, is also propelled by some more selfish motives that I noted. Finally, though, I think Clytemnestra uses this method of tricking Agamemnon into the palace so that when she executes him, he will see to his horror that he has been tricked, that he has been manipulated and overpowered by a woman. Now, the revelation of this trickery would then be part of his punishment, and Clytemnestra wants that. And perhaps it would be an appropriate punishment for Agamemnon, this terrible moment of recognition, because after all, this is a man who had bragged about using deception, the deception of the Trojan horse, to slaughter the entire city of Troy. So in some way, his own act of deception would now be countered by this one, and he would be humbled in recognizing that he too has been tricked. Now, you remember that that enormous horse was presented as a gift, as an act of homage to the Trojans, very much like the red carpet is being presented in homage to Agamemnon, and both of them were images, vehicles, if you will, of flattery that really concealed death within them, that led to death. Well, Clytemnestra overcomes Agamemnon's reluctance to walk on the tapestries by reminding him of two things when he hesitates. She says, first, if Priam had won, if the king of Troy were victorious, he surely would walk on them. And Agamemnon readily envisions Priam in that regard, and that image is so distasteful that he says, no, you're right. Yes, he would do it, so I must do it. And second, and perhaps more important, she says that the people want to honor Agamemnon this way, that it's not just her who wants him to descend from the chariot onto the carpet, but that this is what the people themselves of Mycenae want. That as a great victor, it becomes you, she says, to give way to their humble wishes. So, after a moment's hesitation, he steps out of the chariot onto the tapestries. And as with his choice to execute Iphigenia in the chorus's words, in doing this, he slips his neck into the harness of destiny once again. Now, this is the climax of the play, and a moment that Aristotle calls peripeteia, that is, the moment of reversal. Agamemnon's fortune at this moment is about to change from triumph in war to humiliation and death. In his fall and this sudden decline in fortune, we find both these things, this fall and this reversal, visually suggested, literally, if you will, when he steps down from the chariot onto the ground. That sense of downward movement for a Greek audience would have visually signified now that his fortunes have fallen as well. And I hope you saw the kind of dramatic effect of that in the clip that I sent you from the film version of Agamemnon. Now, this climactic moment is another instance, of course, of something else, what Aristotle calls hamartia, an error in judgment in the individual, fueled, in this case, unmistakably by Agamemnon's pride, but a hamartia, a mistake, an error in judgment that propels the tragic outcome. Agamemnon senses the danger of his choice the instant before he steps down, and indeed is so uneasy about it that he insists that before he does so, he must have them remove his combat boots. But Clytemnestra says, "The power is yours if you surrender all of your own free will to me." Agamemnon says, "No, enough. But if you're so determined," turning to the women and pointing to his boots, he has them, "Yes, take my boots off." And then he steps down. "While I tread this splendor's dyed red in the sea, may no god watch and strike me down with envy from on high." Yes, as he is just about to put his foot on the ground, he says, "Okay, don't strike me dead for doing this, gods." And then when he steps down, already feeling that he is making a mistake, but overpowered by his own pride, he takes a few steps and then pauses, as if he knows that indeed this is a bad decision, that I've made a mistake. So in order to keep him moving now, Clytemnestra employs the final parts of her strategy of flattering and seduction. First, she says that she would have dared offend the gods herself by walking on tapestries, if only by doing that she could have brought him back. Yes, I would have defied the gods for you. Please, just do this for us. And second, Clytemnestra says that Agamemnon deserves this treatment because he is like a god himself. Quote, "And you are Zeus when Zeus tramples the bitter virgin new wine." Well, the dark red carpet is indeed the color of wine, of those divine grapes, of course, that Zeus tramples. Well, to compare him to a god, that is, of course, very dangerous, but it is also unbelievably seductive. Now, whatever the gods may think of Agamemnon's choice, they're not going to be the ones to strike him down here. That's what he's afraid of, because someone else is going to strike him down first, Clytemnestra. Now, we realize then that Agamemnon has made another fatally bad decision, as he did when he executed Iphigenia 10 years earlier. But to what extent is this decision fully his choice? You might ask, well, wait a minute. Wasn't Agamemnon already doomed to die, destined for death the moment he killed his daughter, thereby engendering Clytemnestra's fury and reenacting the sin of his father Atreus that prompted the family curse in which Agamemnon is caught? The answer is yes. It's clear that Agamemnon would, given those forces, be killed inevitably. But he didn't have to die this particular way at this particular time. His decision to walk into the palace against his better judgment on the red tapestries is a free choice to the extent that it allows Clytemnestra to execute him now, in this specific time and place and style as she has planned. Now, no sooner has Agamemnon disappeared behind the palace door than the chorus is seized with terror. Terror beats in their hearts, and they chant these words, quote, "Stark terror whirls the brain, and the end is coming as justice comes to birth." Now, they can no longer deny what they have heretofore dreaded, but refuse to allow themselves to articulate: the brutal, bloody justice that they now feel certain Clytemnestra will inflict on Agamemnon behind those closed doors. But Aeschylus makes us wait for this. He makes us wait almost 400 lines for the actual killing, even though we know that it is going to happen. Now, the effect of this delay is to build in the audience unbearable tension and dread. Alfred Hitchcock once observed that real suspense isn't seeing something suddenly and unexpectedly happen that is terrible. Rather, real suspense is waiting for something awful to happen that we know is going to occur and that we feel all the more oppressed by as the delay goes on and on. The tension of expectation. That's real suspense, and Aeschylus knows this. Well, with Agamemnon off stage, the prophetess Cassandra, whom he has brought, astounds the chorus by recounting things from the past in Argos that, of course, she never saw or heard of. Even more, however, she astonishes them by issuing 3 prophecies of things that are to come. Well, before going inside to kill her husband, Clytemnestra reveals both a dislike for Cassandra, but also a kind of fear of Cassandra's power of prophetic disclosure, because she has a reputation as a visionary. The leader says of Cassandra, she is like a wild creature now, fresh caught, another image of restriction, to which Clytemnestra says she must learn to take the cutting bridle before she foams her spirit off in blood, and that's the last I waste on her, contempt. Note again the image here. Clytemnestra's reference to the cutting bridle you would put on a horse suggests her desire not just to control and to punish Cassandra, but in some way to mute her, to keep her from speaking. As Agamemnon, you remember, had to use a bit in order to silence Iphigenia. The image, in fact, of a cutting bridle suggests or implies that she might even be willing to cut out Cassandra's tongue. Why? Because she's afraid of what Cassandra might see and might prophesy. Indeed, so afraid that she's going to execute her ultimately instead of simply silencing her. Now, the leader of the chorus, speaking alone, pities Cassandra, this, quote, wild creature fresh caught in, quote, the nets of doom, and the leader of the chorus urges her to, quote, leave the empty chariot and of your own free will try on the yoke of fate. Now, that phraseology sounds rather paradoxical. Of your own free will try on the yoke of fate? What's he mean? He means, I think, that Cassandra's only act of free will is to surrender by her own volition to her captivity, in a sense to unite her own will with the inevitable, to choose to join her own will with forces beyond her control. Cassandra cries out to Apollo in anguish and anger at this point. She calls the god Apollo, quote, my destroyer. You destroy me twice. Well, what does she mean by that rather cryptic remark? Well, As Cassandra explains, she is not just a priestess of Apollo who voices prophecies from him and who wears the garments of a soothsayer. No, she is also Apollo's victim. Now, as gods are wont to do with mortal women, he raped Cassandra in the past. And as Zeus had raped and impregnated Leda, you may remember, in the form of a swan years before, which gave rise to Helen and Clytemnestra's birth. But in this case, the consequences of the rape are different because there was no impregnation. Rather, Cassandra explains that after Apollo assaulted her, she did something rather daring in resisting him. She says, Apollo came like a wrestler, magnificent, took me down and breathed his fire through me, and, the leader says, you bore him a child? Cassandra, no, I yielded then. At the climax, I recoiled. I deceived Apollo. Deceived him because he did not know that she was going to pull away in the midst of this sexual assault so as not to take on his seed. Now, as punishment for resisting him, for in some way not taking on his seed at the moment of climax, Apollo punished her by giving her, quote, the birth pang of a seer. Instead of the birth pang of a child, the birth pang of becoming a prophetess. That is, she took on his prophetic power instead of his seed. But with the drawback that although you will be a prophetess and speak the truth of things to come, no one will ever believe you. Quote, once I betrayed him, I could not be believed, she says. So when she speaks then of how Apollo is one who destroyed her twice, she means that Apollo's two acts of destructions were first forcing the power of prophecy on her, the unwanted power of prophecy, because she doesn't wish to be his priestess or a visionary. And then second, the punishment of rendering the wisdom, the visionary wisdom that she possesses, futile, because no one will believe her, thereby converting the prophetic gift into a curse. Well, Cassandra's rage against Apollo is so intense that she strips off her robes as his soothsayer and stamps them into the ground in an act of defiance. She says, I've paid you back now, she said. Now look for another victim. Now this is a rare gesture of free will and defiance in someone who foresees clearly the end of her life in a place that has been long soaked with blood. And Cassandra astonishes the old men by recounting what she could have never seen or probably heard of, Atreus' monstrous deeds years earlier. She speaks of, quote, the babies wailing, skewed on the sword, their flesh charred, their father gorging on their parts. In short, she sees the way in which Atreus killed Thyestes' children and baked them in a pie, which he ate. She sees, in short, into the past. But she also sees into the future, and her prophecies there are no less horrific. First, Cassandra envisions what is just about to happen behind the closed doors. She foresees Clytemnestra stabbing Agamemnon to death in the bathtub and describes it. No, look there. What's that? Some net flung out of hell? No, she is the snare, the bedmate, deathmate, murder's strong right arm. Look, aye, drag the great bull from the mate. A thrash of robes, she traps him writhing. Black horn glistens twished. She gores him, through, and now he buckles. Look, the bath swirls red. Ugh. Again, we see the image here of robes, as she describes it, trapping the individual. Iphigenia was trapped in her robes. Agamemnon is trapped by Cassandra in his robes, and Cassandra herself will be trapped in her own robes when she's killed. All of which are meant to suggest, again, like those other associative images, the forces of determinism, the constricting power that we've seen of fury, of the family curse, and of the gods, all pressing down and limiting free will, but not eliminating it completely. Now note that in this vision, Clytemnestra, already described as mannish, in Cassandra's view, has appropriated a kind of phallic, penetrative power. Cassandra compares Clytemnestra's knife that she's going to stab Agamemnon with to the goring horns of a male bull, as if now she has become fully masculinized and phallic. Now, Cassandra clearly has no love for Agamemnon, who has abducted her, but she is horrified at Clytemnestra's deception and at Agamemnon's blindness to what his wife is doing to him. She says, speaking in this respect, I must wear his yoke. I am Agamemnon's slave, the lord of the men of war. He obliterated Troy. Yet he is so blind, so lost to that despicable hellhound Clytemnestra, who pricks her ears and fawns, and her tongue draws out her glittering words of welcome. What outrage! The woman kills the man. You will see him dead. Okay, well, it's an unmistakable prophecy. Now, note, she regrets Agamemnon's blindness and realizes it is a blindness rooted in pride that makes him susceptible to flattery. A moment later, Cassandra issues her second prophecy, which is that of her own imminent death. She says, quote, the knife awaits me. She tells the chorus, they'll splay me on the iron's double edge. Okay, she'll be run through with knives. Now, specifically, she knows that Clytemnestra is going to murder her, and she describes what she regards as inevitable this way. She is the lioness. Remember, the lion is the symbol of Mycenae. She is the lioness. She rears on her hind legs. She beds with the wolf when her own lion king goes ranging. She will now kill me. Okay. Clytemnestra is the lioness in this symbolic description. Agestheus, whom she beds with, is the wolf, and Agamemnon is now the murdered lion king. Clytemnestra says, I too will be murdered, but I must be brave, she tells the chorus. Quote, it is my turn to die. My time has come. Little gain from flight. And then, knowing that, she deliberately walks on her own into the palace, which in a sense is her only gesture of freedom at this point, the freedom to embrace her own doom. Now, that is in a sense what the chorus had recommended. She does it. The choral leader says, to go nobly lends a man some grace, and a woman some grace as well. Cassandra asks only that the chorus, in her words, quote, will testify to how I died, end quote. That is, she wants them to transmit to the world that she died with a full understanding of the circumstances impelling that death. In short, she wants them to communicate to anyone who will listen that she died with what Aristotle would call tragic recognition. But is she tragic in the fullest sense? Is Cassandra a tragic heroine, if you will? Well, as a prisoner of both Agamemnon and Apollo, Cassandra's suffering and conduct are certainly noble and certainly courageous, and she is more genuinely sympathetic, I think, than either Agamemnon or Clytemnestra. But that's just the problem. Cassandra is, in fact, so virtuous in this version of the story, so unjustly victimized, that certainly according to Aristotle, she wouldn't qualify as a tragic hero. Because remember, in his formulation, he argues that when a wholly good individual, an innocent individual, suffers a bad outcome, we feel a sense of horror at the injustice, but we don't feel the tragic emotions of pity and fear that come through identification with someone we feel is like us, because she is, in fact, far better than we are. Rather, pity and fear come only when we see the undoing of an individual who is fundamentally noble, but still, like us, imperfect. Now, whether Agamemnon or Clytemnestra fit the criteria of a tragic hero, according to Aristotle, is a question I'm going to reserve for the end of the play. But Cassandra's third and final prophecy looks beyond the play to the second part of the Oresteia. And this is the most remarkable prophecy she issues. She foresees the return of the exiled Orestes to avenge Agamemnon by executing justice on his mother Clytemnestra. And she makes this final prophetic declaration when she says, just before going into the palace, "There will come another to avenge us, born to kill his mother, born his father's champion, a wanderer, a fugitive, driven off his native land, he will come home. But I must be brave now, it's my turn to die." Yes, she's describing, of course, the absent, exiled Orestes. And it's interesting that in envisioning his return, Clytemnestra says that he will avenge us, that is, avenge her too, because she now sees herself as Clytemnestra's victim, not just Apollo's victim, okay? Ultimately, it is Clytemnestra who will take her life. Now, a moment after she enters the palace, she witnesses the murder that we don't see on stage, but that we hear in the dying gasps of Agamemnon from behind the skein. The chorus hears these as well. Cries within the palace, Agamemnon, "Ah! Struck deep! The death blow deep!" Agamemnon again, "Ah! A second blow struck home!" Hearing this, the old men scatter. Each goes off singly, horrified, terrified, traumatized by the sound of the king being slaughtered. Now, the chorus reacts here then with panic and confusion because they are too weak, these old men, to intervene. As they say now in single voices, momentarily breaking apart, "Do something, no, do something, no, never, never, not a plan in sight, let me to action, do some planning." No, they scatter, they're fragmented. Now, remarkably though, these old men will change a little bit later and become assertive, even brave by the end of the play, but not now. And at this point, it is too late for them to save either Agamemnon or Cassandra. When the palace doors open, Clytemnestra proudly presents her handiwork. Agamemnon's body, quote, shrouded in bloody robes and lying in the silver cauldron, that is, the bathtub, where she had invited him for a kind of honorific cleansing and where she had stabbed him, where she had executed him. Now, normally, witnessing such an event is a messenger who relays the bloody deed and how it occurred. It's usually, in Greek drama, a messenger who reports these kinds of violent incidents, but not here. Clytemnestra does it herself because she delights in describing every single detail to make us see what we didn't see on stage, but now might be able to envision as if we did. She says, "I brooded on this trial, this ancient blood feud, year by year. At last my hour came, and here I stand, and here I struck, and here my work is done. It is done. I don't deny it, no. He had no way to flee or fight his destiny." And then, unwinding the robes from Agamemnon's body and spreading them out for them to see, they see his body and they see the bloody robes. Our never-ending, all-embracing net, there's that word again. It cast wide for the royal hall. I coil him round and round in the wealth, the robes of doom. Trapped in robes, the robes constrict him. And then I strike him twice, once and twice, and at each stroke he cries out in agony, and he goes down, and the life is bursting out of him. Great sprays of blood, and the murderous shower wounds me, dyes me black, and I revel like the earth when the spring rains come down. It is right, and more than right. He flooded the vessel of our proud house with misery, with the vintage of the curse, and now he drains the dregs. Quite a declaration, quite a justification, and quite a kind of sadistic gratification she feels, both in executing him and in describing the execution. Now, you'll note that Clytemnestra insists that this killing was, quote, right and more than right, and she calls it, quote, a masterpiece of justice for several reasons. First, She says it was fully justified as an act of vengeance for Agamemnon's killing of Iphigenia. Quote, he sacrificed his own child, our daughter. Okay. Second, she claims this killing was justified and necessary in her mind because Agamemnon brought to the vessel of their marriage and family life what she calls the vintage of the curse of the house of Atreus, that he was polluted, corrupted, because he inherited the sin of his father, who killed his nieces and nephews. And finally, she says the ancient savage spirit of revenge was necessary and justified as a response to Atreus' killing of his brother's children, except for Agastheus, because in a certain sense, that crime had to be expunged, the killing of innocent children, and the only way to do that was to kill the son of Atreus, Agamemnon. Killing Agamemnon, then, Atreus' quote, perfect son, is a crowning sacrifice that, in her view, evens the score within the family. Thus, Clytemnestra calls the great sprays of blood that flew up from Agamemnon's body when she was stabbing him once and again, she refers to those sprays of blood that covered her as spring rains. That is, the sacrificial execution. This bloodletting, she claims, purified the earth and purified her by removing this corrupt, evil man who was the son of a corrupt and evil father. Okay. Now note that in this curious speech in which she seems sadistically delight in the killing and at the same time insist it was justified, note that she doesn't call it murder. Rather, she says, I sacrificed this man. Yeah. Now, you'll also note Clytemnestra makes no mention of her other motives for killing Agamemnon. The urge to power, to continue as ruler, the lust for her lover Agastheus, whom she clearly prefers to her husband, her jealousy at the people's devotion to and welcome of Agamemnon, and finally her anger and sense of insult at the appearance of Cassandra, his love slave. But why does she also then have to kill and feel she has to kill the entirely innocent Cassandra, who certainly did not wish to come back to Mycenae with Agamemnon? Well, there is no justification for this, but there are several motives. First, I would say, even though Clytemnestra clearly hates Agamemnon, she is still motivated by a kind of sexual jealousy for this younger woman, whom she calls, quote, this seer of Apollo who shared my husband's bed. And indeed, she notes that in some way, she would not have been the first to share his bed while Agamemnon was away, because she says a little later, he brings a fresh, voluptuous relish to my bed. But she also notes that he had other lovers as well, that in a certain way, Cassandra is the latest in a long series, so she's a kind of scapegoat for all of the other betrayals. Here he lies, she says, he brutalized me, the darling of all the golden girls who spread the gates of Troy. And here his spear prize. I hope you note the erotic implications of the golden girls who spread the gates of Troy. All those golden girls who spread their legs for him and his sword thrust. Yeah, she imagines that Cassandra was the most recent. So in a sense, she wants to kill her as a form of outrage at all of the sexual infidelities that her husband committed while he was away, which is rather hypocritical, given, in fact, that she has taken a lover herself. But I think Clytemnestra also takes, unmistakably, a kind of sadistic pleasure in killing Cassandra, as she may also in killing Agamemnon. That there's a bloodlust here, a kind of erotic delectation in the act of killing itself, particularly killing this rather innocent girl, which is also hypocritical since, after all, it was the innocent Iphigenia whom she is ostensibly avenging when she killed Agamemnon. But you'll note that she says she brings a fresh, voluptuous pleasure to my bed. Yeah, I feel a kind of arousal at the idea that I can destroy her, just as I've destroyed her lover. But I think Clytemnestra kills Cassandra most of all because Cassandra poses a danger as a seer. Clytemnestra doesn't want to know the future because she knows that blood must answer blood. Now, at first, the chorus condemns Clytemnestra for killing Agamemnon. They compare her to a predatory black widow spider that kills and devours its mate after catching her the prey in its web. Yet they have the image of web again, another one of these images of determinism. They tell Clytemnestra that she will, quote, bear the curse of Greece because she is, quote, mad with ambition, shilling pride, crazed with the carnage that rages through your brain. Yes, they understand the sadistic pleasure she took and the drive for power and lust that she does not acknowledge in her justifications. And they are right about that. But they are also come to recognize that Clytemnestra did have some claim to justice as the aggrieved mother of Iphigenia in killing her husband. The chorus understands that, and because they understand it, even though they dislike her, it moderates their view of Clytemnestra by the end of the play. They see all of her other motives, yes, but they see in some way the justification in the revenge of the dead child. Now, the old men also, you remember, condemn Helen for causing the war, as I noted last time, for being what they call the angel of agony. But it's interesting that when they say that, Clytemnestra defends her sister Helen as, quote, a scourge of men like herself. It's a phrase that suggests that Clytemnestra clearly resents not just her husband's power as king, and not just his misogyny and his infidelity, but that as a woman, she resents Greek patriarchy in general. And that in killing Agamemnon, we sense she's also striking out against a male-dominated society and overturning that power structure when she kills him and holding on to the power of the throne herself. Now, even as the chorus mourns Agamemnon as, quote, a godlike man, they can't deny that there, as I've noted, was some legitimacy in Clytemnestra's defense that she was avenging Iphigenia. Thus, they say, justice brings new acts of agony, using the word justice to describe it, even though there was more to it. And they note that perhaps Clytemnestra wielded, quote, the sharp sword of justice, at least in part. Ultimately, then, the chorus can't condemn her or find her guilty for avenging Iphigenia, even though they understand her other, certainly illegitimate motives. And as a result, in their uncertainty and ambivalence, they leave the play's readers and viewers to form our own judgment. They say ultimately, when they think about this, justice brings new acts of agony, yes, on our new grindstones. Each charge meets countercharge. None can judge between them. Justice, the plunderer plundered, the killer pays the price. Yes, charge and countercharge. For every act of killing, there's a justification, and for every justification, there is a charge against that justification, as we've seen. Ultimately, then, we must decide. Now, you'll note that when they make this statement, that ultimately, as they put it, none can judge, Clytemnestra says, at last you see the future and the truth. She exults at this. Yes, you see the truth at last. You see that I'm not guilty. But, of course, this isn't the only change that we find in the chorus, this recognition of an element of legitimacy in Clytemnestra. The other change comes when Aegisthus enters and feasts his eye, quote, on the body of Agamemnon. Now, for him, it's familial payback, because you remember Agamemnon's father Atreus had made Aegisthus' father Thyestes, quote, a love feast of his children's flesh. But Aegisthus is a loathsome individual. There's nothing noble about him, and the chorus is not sympathetic. In fact, the chorus denounces him as a coward who didn't fight in the war, who, quote, fouled Agamemnon's lair in his absence by becoming the lover of Clytemnestra, and who didn't even participate in killing Agamemnon, though he does in some other versions of the story, as we'll see in Sophocles. Now, the chorus also denounces Aegisthus as a blustering liar who claims that he helped plan Agamemnon's death, but, quote, cringed to cut him down with your own hand. In short, you're a bragger, you're a coward, you're power hungry, you're corrupt. There's nothing about him that they find the least bit appealing. In response to these insults, Aegisthus threatens the chorus, these old men, he even has his men, his entourage, draw their swords. But now, kind of amazingly, the once passive, timorous old men who refer to themselves as dried leaves, as less than men, now they brandish their sticks, these wooden sticks that they used to walk with, and vow to fight, quote, to the last man. What a transformation! The transformation it's incredible. They realize that, as they say, they are suffering. And our suffering, however, our pain, they say, again, brings us wisdom. Okay? And through their pain, however, they come not just to wisdom, but now clearly in this moment, also through their pain, seeing the death of Agamemnon, they come to insight and courage. Now, improbably, it is Clytemnestra who breaks up this encounter between the chorus and Aegisthus. And she does so just because she, dislikes disorder. She's in complete power now. She doesn't feel threatened by the chorus at the end of the play any more than she did at the beginning. They're just old men. She tells Aegisthus afterward, let them howl, quote, they're impotent. Now, as she'll discover in Libation Bearers, however, Orestes, her son, is not impotent. And I'll close this commentary by returning to the question of who, if anyone, is the tragic hero in this tragic play. Well, Agamemnon conforms to Aristotle's model in that he's a man of great stature who faced in the past an agonizing choice, go to war or kill your own daughter, and who suffers a reversal impelled by an error that he makes in the play itself in stepping down from the chariot, an error in judgment, a hamartia. All of these are consistent with Aristotle's theory, but is Agamemnon really a fundamentally noble man with a fatal weakness, or is Agamemnon's pride so vast that it overshadows his virtues and makes it impossible for the reader to feel that he suffers more than he deserves, something that Aristotle says is absolutely necessary to engender pity along with our fear? Well, I would say Agamemnon falls far short in this respect of being a noble individual with a flaw. Indeed, he seems so dominated by his pride that it eclipses everything else, and therefore makes it difficult in Aristotelian terms for us to regard him as a tragic hero. Some would say that he gets what he deserves. And certainly another problem from the Aristotelian point of view is that he never gains the self-recognition that Aristotle says tragic heroism requires. Now, we can imagine a moment of terrible recognition behind the skein when, as he's about to being stabbed, he realizes how Clytemnestra has set him up, has tripped him through her flattery and planning just before he dies. Yes, that would be, after all, a moment of terrible tragic recognition, but note that Aeschylus doesn't present that to the audience. We don't hear him say those things. We assume that that knowledge descends upon him, but it's not dramatized. Indeed, although the play then is titled Agamemnon, we also note that Aeschylus only presents him on stage for a single scene, which again complicates our ability to regard him as the play's tragic hero. And this says, well, okay, what about Clytemnestra then as a tragic figure? Well, of her, Robert Fagles, the editor and translator of our edition, writes, quote, The play is named for Agamemnon, but the tragic hero is the queen because she embraces her fate. Well, if Cassandra embraces her fate, but does Clytemnestra? I must confess that I don't quite see this. Indeed, I think Clytemnestra's killing of Cassandra suggests that she doesn't want to see or know her fate, and that killing the young woman is a kind of evasion of that knowledge. And while Clytemnestra may be justified in avenging Iphigenia's death by taking Agamemnon's life, even though it is blood for blood, the fact is that she deceives both the chorus and herself about her other, more ethically questionable, more deeply selfish motives. Okay? Nor does Clytemnestra suffer the normal tragic reversal in a play that Aristotle describes from strength to misfortune. Nor is she the one who suffers within the play at all. So how then, if she doesn't suffer and doesn't suffer a reversal, are we to pity her? Well, curiously, I would say, based on this comparison of the play itself to Aristotle's model, this is a great tragedy, but without what Aristotle at least would call a compelling tragic hero. That is, someone capable of making us feel the pity and fear that comes from identifying with them and feeling that they suffer more than they deserve. Put simply then, in several important respects, Agamemnon fails to conform to Aristotle's definition of tragedy. But remember, that's just one definition. That's just one model of tragedy. Okay, now, I want to prepare for our foray into Electra on Friday by considering the opening scene of this great play by Sophocles. And let me begin with a few words about Sophocles himself. He was born into a well-to-do Athenian family and grew up at a time when the festival of Dionysia competition was well established, and when the plays had not yet, however, become as complex and expressive as they would, in large part through his own participation in the competition. Now, this participation began in 468 BC, when Sophocles was about 28. By then, Aeschylus had been active and dominating the competition for 3 decades, and he still was working when Sophocles began. Well, Sophocles would go on to win the drama prize himself numerous times, mostly for tragedies that unfortunately no longer survive. In fact, only 7 of the 123 known titles of plays that the prolific Sophocles wrote do survive, and we know of that number of other plays only through references to them by other Greek writers, but the texts themselves have vanished. Now, the most famous of the 7 surviving plays is one you may have read, Oedipus Rex, probably the greatest of all Greek tragedies. It's the work that Aristotle cites most often in formulating his theory of tragedy in the Poetics. The play tells the story of King Oedipus, a man who unknowingly kills his father Laius and marries his mother Jocasta. He had been informed earlier in his life that he was destined to do so by the Delphic oracle, where a priestess spoke for the god Apollo. So, in an attempt to escape or evade this terrible prophecy, Oedipus flees to another town, only to discover that, inadvertently nonetheless, he has still committed parricide and incest. These acts are the hamartia, if you will, the killing of the father and the marrying of a mother. They're hamartia in the sense of being fatal errors, mistakes. But they are not, in his case, errors that grow out of any tragic flaw in character, the way they are in Agamemnon. Now, even though Oedipus tried to evade the prophecy, which he had nothing to do with invoking because it was simply inflicted on him. It wasn't a punishment for anything he did. And yet, nonetheless, while he's the victim of this prophecy, of this terrible destiny, Oedipus is so guilt-ridden by what he has done when he learns it that he punishes himself. Specifically, he blinds himself for failing to see that he was committing these crimes at the time. Later, we see the blind Oedipus in exile in another play by Sophocles called Oedipus at Colonus. Now, 2 of Oedipus's other finest works, Electra, the one we're reading, and Antigone, feature female protagonists. As I've noted, it's a paradox that so many Greek tragedies focus on the experience of suffering women, yet females were neither allowed to act on the Greek stage nor to attend the performances. Well, Antigone is the daughter of Oedipus, and like Electra, she's burdened by a painful sense of moral duty toward a dead family member. Antigone wants to bury her dead brother Polynices in a dignified ritual way, but she's forbidden to do so by the family enemy, King Creon of Thebes. Creon, we'll see, is also going to play an important role in Euripides' tragedy Medea. Now, Electra's moral imperative is even more extreme and agonizing than Antigone's, and she is caught in an ethical dilemma as well. Electra is torn between the need to avenge the death of her father Agamemnon as a matter of justice versus the ethical horror of taking revenge on her mother Clytemnestra, the woman who bore her and a blood relation. To do so, of course, would violate the Greek taboo of shedding the blood of a family member. Now, Sophocles lived to the age of 90 and seems to have continued writing almost to the end, but his death coincided with a collapse of Athenian culture itself. The city went into a steep decline in 405 BC when they were defeated after a long war with their militaristic rival Sparta. As a result, the ancient bastion of art and ideas and democratic principles in Athens was transformed horribly. The Athenian government was replaced by a repressive Spartan oligarchy, and Athens, once the center of Greek culture, became a captive city. Electra opens in the exact location that Agamemnon did, that is, in front of the royal palace in Mycenae, and all the visible action in both plays occurs here, again, in both matching stage time to audience time, in keeping with the classical unities of time and place. Although the play is divided into scenes, the action is continuous, without any time gaps in between those scenes, and there would have been, of course, no rising or falling curtain or scenery changes of any kind to mark a change in time or place. Although Electra is the protagonist of the play, she is the unmistakable primary psychological and moral focus. Nonetheless, the play begins with the presentation of her younger brother Orestes, who was whisked away from Argos as a young child after the murder of his father Agamemnon. Orestes now, at the start of the play, is a young man, and he has just arrived in secret in the city of his birth after years spent abroad. He has returned to wreak vengeance on his mother for murdering his father, just as Clytemnestra had avenged Iphigenia's death by executing Agamemnon. Orestes also plans to kill his uncle Aegisthus, Clytemnestra's lover and co-conspirator, who shares the throne with her and who, in this version, participated in the murder of Agamemnon with her. Now, you note a key difference here, because in Aeschylus' version of the story, Clytemnestra kills Agamemnon alone. Another difference in Sophocles' interpretation of the legend is the cause of Orestes' exile from Argos, whereas Aeschylus leaves why and how he was taken away rather ambiguous. Sophocles makes it clear that Electra arranged for her younger brother, still a very young child then, to be taken away after Agamemnon's death because Electra feared Clytemnestra would kill the little boy. Well, the old slave who took him away and raised Orestes sets the opening scene and provides this important piece of background information from the start, when, at the beginning of the play, the old slave says, "Look, the land of your dreams, Orestes, the ancient plain of Argos, the sacred grove where Io was plagued by the stinging gadfly. There, Orestes, the forum of Apollo, the wolf-killing god. To the left, the famous temple of Hera." It almost sounds like a tour guide. "The place we have reached you may call Mycenae, rich in gold, and here the palace of Atreus, rich in blood. From here, some years ago when your father was murdered, your sister Electra handed you into my care until you reached your prime of manhood to avenge your father's murder." Okay, now, while the old slave's remarks, of course, provide important pieces of background information by filling in events for the audience, he's also providing information and clarification for Orestes. Because having reached now his prime of manhood, he's probably, let us say, 18, Orestes has longed dreamed of returning to Mycenae after approximately 15 years of exile. But having only been there as a young child, coming back now, Orestes doesn't remember much about his home. Thus, the kind of tour guide introduction. Oh yes, there's the shrine of Apollo. There's the palace. There's this and that. Thus, he must be reintroduced to this place by the old retainer. Now that's important because non-recognition is going to be an important trope in this play. Orestes has been away so long that he and Electra won't recognize each other, and Clytemnestra, fatally for her, will fail to recognize him as her own son when Orestes pretends to be a messenger. Now that he is no longer a child, Orestes is ready for the revenge, for the vengeance that he's long anticipated, and anticipated largely because Electra has been writing to him for many years, explaining to him that his mother killed his father and urging Orestes to take vengeful action. The time has now arrived. Note the immediate and important emphasis on timing here at the start. Orestes is now old enough to act, and the servant tells him that the moment for revenge has arrived. Do not miss it. He says, "Get all your talking done before any man ventures abroad. This is the final crossroads, Orestes. The time for flinching is past. To action now." Well, Orestes understands this. In fact, he understands himself the importance of timing, because he has, after all, timed his return to coincide with a period when Aegisthus is away from the palace, which gives Orestes easier access to Clytemnestra. Now, the old slave's opening allusions are also significant. He mentions the nearby temple of Apollo in anticipation of Orestes' account of consulting Apollo's main temple at Delphi. There, the ancient priestess of Apollo would go into a trance and transmit the gods' often enigmatic words to those who came. Now, the words spoken to Orestes advised him to use deception in enacting human justice against Clytemnestra. And Orestes will do this. He'll use deception by tricking his mother, first by issuing a rumor that he is dead, and then by pretending to be a messenger carrying, allegedly, his own ashes back to Mycenae. This deception seems appropriate, after all, because Clytemnestra used deception in arranging Agamemnon's murder. But the gods, remember, Apollo included, can be very fickle and cruel, as he certainly was to Cassandra, and they can also, the gods, be decidedly unjust. And the slave's reference to the mortal woman Io indicates this, reminds us of it. Io was tormented with gadflies by Zeus's jealous wife Hera because Zeus was sexually attracted to Io. Now, the servant tells Orestes that after so much planning, they are now at what he calls the final crossroads, literally and figuratively. Literally, Orestes must cross into the palace to kill his mother. Figuratively, however, this is the moment, the crossroads when he must choose to act. Now, this raises again the familiar question regarding both Orestes and Electra that we also saw in Agamemnon and in most Greek tragedy. And that is, to what extent are they really free to choose? How free are they to act on their own volition? This metaphysical question about the relationship between destiny and free will that Aeschylus explored in Agamemnon is one that Sophocles returns to again and again, and he's considering it here now in relation to the next generation of the house of Atreus, not Clytemnestra and Agamemnon, but rather their children Orestes and Electra. It's worth noting that in the second part of the Oresteia, Libation Bearers, when Orestes returned in that play by Aeschylus, he seems less a free agent than he is in Sophocles' version of the story here. And this is because in Aeschylus' play, we learn that the Delphic oracle had expressly ordered Orestes to kill his mother. He seems, therefore, in Aeschylus to have very little choice because Apollo orders it and wills his actions. But, by contrast, you'll remember, Sophocles' Orestes has planned to execute Clytemnestra before he ever consults the Delphic oracle. And, more important, when he does, Apollo's utterance doesn't command him to kill his mother, nor initiate it through an order, as it does in Aeschylus. Rather, in Sophocles, Apollo merely, rather vaguely, advises Orestes to use deceit, stealth, deception in doing it. So Orestes then, in this version of the play, seems more self-directed than he does in Aeschylus' Libation Bearers. Here is how Orestes recalls his visit to Delphi and what he learned there. When I went to the Delphic oracle to ask precisely how I ought to take revenge on my father's murderers, again, not should I, but how, Apollo made a response which is quickly told. Quote, "Not with the might of shielded host shall justice see her purpose done. By lone deceit and stealthy craft must blood be shed and victory won." That was the oracle we heard. Let us act accordingly. Okay. Well, that line, "let us act accordingly," suggests that Sophocles Orestes must devise his own strategy of, quote, lone deceit. So he is acting then with considerably greater freedom, with less compulsion than Aeschylus' Orestes does. Now, the strategy that he recounts, that he has devised, is entirely his own. In it, he adopts a false identity, he says, so as to facilitate a surprise attack on his mother, who will be unprepared and defenseless. He takes great pride in what he has formulated. He says, "Give them the news, with an oath to back it up, that Orestes is dead, killed by a fatal accident, flung from his running chariot at the Pythian Games. That's the story you'll tell. And now for us, first we'll pour libations on my father's grave, as the god instructed, and crown of the curling lock cut from my head before we retrace our steps, bearing with us the urn of bronze, which I think you also know is lying concealed in the bushwood, the one that is supposed to be containing my ashes. Our crafty tale will bring them glad tidings that my body has been cremated and now consists of nothing but charred remains. What harm does it do me to say I'm dead?" Let me ask you, are you at all troubled by Orestes' obvious delight in describing this crafty tale, this elaborate deception? Well, the ruse reminds us of Clytemnestra's tricks, for certain, of deceiving Agamemnon to gain his trust before killing him. And while she may deserve that same treatment now, Orestes does seem ironically to have inherited his mother's talent for deceit, even though he's going to use it to kill her. There's something unsavory in this, perhaps, and also something, I think, unmistakably immature in Orestes at this point, that I think Sophocles wants us to pick up on. This Orestes, indeed, may have justice on his side. It may, as the Delphic oracle suggests, be an act of justice, though it will certainly be one that he must pay for. But Orestes doesn't seem very sympathetic on our first encounter, any more than Agamemnon did in Aeschylus. First, Orestes seems off-putting because he shows no qualms or moral discomfort at all about using deception. Even though he'd been advised to do it by Apollo with the oracle, the plan is, after all, underhanded, and you might even say it harkens back to the dishonesty of the original sin of the house of Atreus, in which Atreus lured Thyestes back to Argos with the promise of reconciliation, only to kill his children. Second, Orestes is unappealing because when he says, "What harm does it do to me to say I'm dead?" in saying that, he is violating a taboo. He's dismissing the Greek injunction about false death reports. You don't claim that you or anyone else are dead if you know they're alive. It is considered a very bad omen. And yet Orestes brags, I'm not afraid. Third, Orestes seems unsympathetic here because he shows no signs of guilt at the thought of killing his own mother, as a kind of grim necessity. Now, it's true that he hasn't seen Clytemnestra for many years, but still, she is his mother. And certainly, he differs in this respect from the Orestes we find in Aeschylus, who suffers a terrible moral conflict over the need to kill Clytemnestra. And he even differs in this respect from Electra herself in this play, who, though she speaks of the need for vengeance, doesn't let her itself envision actually killing her mother because, of course, she knows that it is terrible. There's no sense of that guilt or horror at all on the part of Orestes. Now, he conveniently does something else that I think we might find troubling in his character. And that is, he conveniently tries to evade any kind of moral responsibility for his planned matricide by saying that he is only following, quote, Apollo's orders and that he's sent by the gods. But as I noted, Apollo didn't actually order him to kill Clytemnestra, but only advised him to use deceit and craft in the process. So that sounds a bit dishonest, and it also sounds like an excuse. And it's even more troubling that at other times Orestes contradicts the statement, the false statement that he was sent by the gods, by stressing how he devised the plan himself, how he acted freely, and therefore deserves credit for his ingenious military stratagem. So again, in this contradiction, he seems immature and ethically rather suspect. But perhaps the most off-putting aspect in Orestes, as we see him at the beginning here, is that he doesn't consider how this ruse, this report of his death, will devastate his sister Electra, who has been pleading with him to return for years and to avenge them, all the while mourning their murdered father day after day. Well, clearly, this young man, Orestes, is self-centered, as suggested by that very phrase, "What harm can feigning my own death do to me?" Well, feigning your own death can do a great deal of harm to your sister. Now, this insensitivity to her and how it will affect her is all the more egregious because Sophocles lets us hear the moans of Electra inside the palace, offstage behind the scheme. She doesn't know that Orestes has returned at this point. She's inside in a perpetual state of wailing and suffering 10 years after the death of her father. Orestes hasn't seen her at this point, 20 years before the death of her father. Orestes hasn't seen his sister in over 15 years, having been taken away at about the age of 3 when his father was killed. And when he does see Clytemnestra, of course, he's not going to recognize her. But here the problem is that even though he doesn't know that's Electra inside, he doesn't seem moved by the cries of pain. And even when the old servant says, that well could be your sister Electra, and even when the old servant urges him to listen out of respect, he doesn't want to do it. The old slave says, "Listen, I thought I heard one of the servants moaning softly behind the door." Indeed, Electra's inside saying, "Oh, boy, I'm wretched. "Listen, my son," the old man says. "So wretched. Could it be Electra? Ought we to stay here where we are and listen while she laments? Just out of respect, because it could be your suffering sister?" To which Orestes says, No, Apollo's orders first. Well, those were not Apollo's orders, okay? The proper start must be libations at my father's grave. This is the way to victory and to success. Let's get on with it here. Yeah, he's utterly insensitive to the feelings of the person who loves him most. Too preoccupied with victory and success to think about the sister who saved his life. And this makes us wonder about some of his motives, indeed, as we should. Consider what he says a moment later about how he envisions the outcome here. He suggests that while he is seeking justice for Clytemnestra's killing of Agamemnon, which has created a moral corruption in the kingdom, he also, at the same time, is driven by his own self-interests. He says that my real salvation, and wins me a glorious prize, in my opinion, is that the outcome will be the death of my mother. No word can be a bad omen if it leads to such a gain. A false report of death is a trick I've often seen used by clever philosophers. They come back home again with their prestige. It's higher than ever. So it will be with me. I swear that this news of my death will allow me to live and shine like a star on my foes in time to come. Well, note that the young Orestes, as we find him here, wants glory and reputation. And he thinks that his cleverness and deceit will earn him that people will admire the ruse that he is using, claiming that he has died. And he thinks that fulfilling his bloody plan will win him what he calls the glorious prize. What is that glorious prize? Well, it's not just fame and public admiration, though he clearly wants that, as we've seen. The ultimate prize, though, the glorious prize he speaks of, is power and wealth that comes by becoming the new lord of the house of Atreus after his mother's death. He says, Sent by the gods, I come in the name of justice to purify you, but let me not leave this land dishonored. I may be lord of my wealth and establish my house anew. Oh, yes. Okay. I'm going to be the king. Now, in contrast, then, to Orestes' self-serving motives to go along with the justified need for revenge, in contrast to those, Electra's seem more noble. When she first appears on stage, her words are, "I am so wretched," essentially the same words we heard off stage. And that sums up her existence. As she appears on stage, she is going out, as she does each day, to pour wine as a libation, as an offering on her father's grave. She's done this now for ever since he died, which at this point is certainly 15 years earlier at least. And she chants her perpetual sorrow in a formal lamentation known as a monody. Her ritualized words are always the same, as is each day of her life. They are given over, her activities each day, to a perpetual repetition of sorrow and mourning for her father. And so that when she first appears, she says, "Through the nights I have kept my vigil of tears. My hateful bed in a house of pain is witness to all my laments for my poor wretched father. Alas, from his homeland murderous Ares refused him a grave. My own dear mother, she and her mate Agestheus, as woodcutters fell an oak, they split his skull with a murderous axe, and I alone, Father, in sadness am left to pour pity on you, so sadly, shamefully murdered, crying my sorrow to the world here in the royal gateway." Now, why does Electra perform this ritual of mourning in public, as she says, in the royal gateway every day, where everyone, from the chorus to anyone passing by, can see? Well, she makes this mourning public because she will not allow people to forget their king. She doesn't want the people of Argos ever to forget that he was murdered 15 years earlier. She wants them to remember him. She wants him always to be on their mind, and she wants them to share her outrage that he has not been avenged. Okay? So the public nature of this is in part to force upon them the kind of painful memory that they might otherwise prefer to forget. The mourning rites in ancient Greece were normally assigned to women, but Electra takes hers to extremes of duration and extremes of intensity. But there are other motives in these public performances beside the need just to remind the people of Agamemnon's unavenged death. One of those motives is filial duty. She sees these rites as something that she owes her beloved dead father, as a kind of moral obligation. And one might argue that she takes it too far and that her feeling for him borders on the perverse, but nonetheless she sees it as the ethical duty of a daughter to mourn a father who has been so dishonored. Still another reason is that she mourns publicly in the hope of enlisting supernatural support as well as human support. Specifically, she wants female forces of supernatural vengeance to come to her cause of justice, because she sees Agamemnon's death as unavenged, and as a woman feels that she alone, as a mortal woman, is too weak to take the necessary action to honor him by forcing some punishment on Clytemnestra. Thus she says, "Oh, hear me, power of my father's curse, and you, the dread furies of vengeance, who spy the shedding of kindred blood and robbing of beds in secret lust. Come to me, succor me, punish my father's murder most foul. Give me its support, you female supernatural powers, to avenge what my mother did, the shedding of kindred blood and the secret lust," as she puts it, of taking Agestheus into the bed that should have been Agamemnon's. Still another reason for these displays of public mourning, however, is that she wants to embarrass and irritate Clytemnestra. This is the only power she feels she has against her. But it is an act of resistance in which she wants Clytemnestra always to be reminded of what she's done and, if possible, feel the pain of guilt and horror at what she did. And in so doing, to antagonize her, to inflict a kind of suffering on Clytemnestra. And because it's in public, an embarrassment on Clytemnestra. And indeed, she's succeeded in this to the extent that Clytemnestra, as we'll see, wants to have her banished and sent off to a cave. Thus she says to the chorus and to her sister, I still have my life, not much of a life I know, but this life of perpetual mourning is enough for me. By annoying them, Agestheus and Clytemnestra, I show respect to the dead, if the dead can enjoy respect. Yes, by annoying them. That's the only resistance she feels she can manage, because as a woman, Electra feels unable to undertake revenge on her own, and so she waits anxiously for and pleads for the return of Orestes. Stop there now.